Hello friends. In this lecture we are going to have a look at what are some of the important steps that are taken while you boot up your Linux machine, and also some of the ways that are recommended to properly shut down your machine having Linux operating system. So once you power up a Linux machine, it goes through a certain number of steps, which is a multi-stage boot process which we call, and the first step is post, which is power on self-test, which is a process that gets kicked in once we power on the Linux machine. Now there is a special circuit on the motherboard which tells the CPU to look at a specific predetermined address which holds either the BIOS or EFI, which are the firmwares which are responsible for checking the health of the hardware, like the health of the RAM itself, or the disks which are installed, or interfaces which are available, maybe monitor, and all other attached hardwares which are part of that particular board. Once the post test succeeds or is completed, the control is handed over to MBR or master boot record. So master boot record, which is the first sector on the drive which holds the operating system or the primary partition. The MBR capacity is 512 bytes. This MBR also holds the initial bootloader, which could be like Lilo, which was earlier bootloader of Linux, which stands for Linux and loader, or it could also hold maybe Grub or Grand Unified Bootloader. This MBR record, it also holds the partitioning information about the disk. Now once this loader gets loaded, bootloader, the control is handed over to other loader. This is normally called as Grub 1.5 or even Grub 2. So the control is handed over to the Grub, which then performs certain other checks and then hands over the control or loads init RD, which stands for initial RAM disk, which is just a very tiny piece of root operating system or root file system. Now the purpose of this initial init RD is that it loads it's a very tiny piece of kernel or the Linux itself. You see, the kernel of the Linux is the Linux. All other applications that you see over there, all the commands or bash or GUI, they are just the add-ons of the Linux kernel. So it runs the very tiny bit of kernel, and its main job is to load the modules that are needed for that specific kernel that is running on your hardware, so that the same kernel can be used on multiple hardwares. You see, if all the modules of all the hardwares are embedded into one kernel, because kernel is just one file, so that would be a very bloated kernel and its size would be very huge, and the older systems would not be able to hold that large kernel in the RAM. So what happens is that init RD checks the hardware, and based on the hardware only loads those modules which are to be needed for that specific hardware, and then it hand over the control to the main kernel, which then starts the main process, which is the init process, or in later distribution could be upstart or systemd. Now there could be certain cases where you might need to pass on certain parameters at the startup to the kernel. For example, one of the scenarios that administrator has to encounter is the time when he or she gets himself logged out of the machine because he or she has forgotten or lost the root password. So in order to retrieve the lost password in Linux distribution, first and foremost you need to have the console access, because only then you can change the boot parameters of the kernel. And let me just pull up the terminal and let's see how we can do that change of kernel parameters at the boot level, and let's try to bring the system into single user mode. So here I am at my CentOS Enterprise Linux 7. The procedure for Enterprise Linux 7 is a bit different as compared to the earlier versions of Red Hat Enterprise or even Debian, where you just need to append a keyword single or one after the Linux kernel line. And let me just show you what I mean by that. Now to edit this and go into the single user mode for Enterprise Linux 7, the procedure is you press E over here, which is written over here down at the bottom, to press E to edit the selected item. So I select this first entry, press E, and these are a bunch of lines. Do not worry about that. Just bring it down to this line where this VM Linux, which is the Linux kernel, and you bring it all the way to the end. You can also type in Control E to bring the cursor to the end. Okay, so that is not taking into effect. Anyway, we come all the way at the end, and in earlier releases of Enterprise Linux, you can either type 1 over here or even single, and that will take you right to the root prompt or the system prompt, where you would not need to be asked for the password of the root. You can simply then issue the command password and change the password of the root. But for Enterprise Linux, the things are a little bit different. Over here, you need to issue the command, which is rd.break. And once you issue the command, you do not need to press enter or anything. Just type or press Control X to start the Linux or the CentOS machine. So I'm gonna press Control X and just hang in there for a while. It will take the process and bring us into the prompt which it has. Now over here, if I type in pwd, we are at the main, and if I type in, let's say, df-h, this command is not there. So anyway, no issues. I just needed to show you that at the moment the system that is mounted is on sysroot. That is a directory sysroot where the system, whole of the system is mounted. So what I can do, and the system is mounted read only. So if we make any changes in the system, that will not take effect. We need to mount it in read write format. So the way to do that is, let me just show you one more thing. If I can type in mount grep and let's say root, we see this line where it says that dev mapper CentOS root on sysroot. So system is mounted, the root is mounted on sysroot, and you can see in the parentheses it says RO. You cannot see my cursor, but I am just by reading, I am for you that type XFS extends file system and the mount type is RO. So what I'm going to do is that mount it in read write format by typing in mount, then -O, then afterwards remount, comma, read write. This is the switch. So just type it again, mount -O, remount, comma, read write, and slash sysroot. So mount the system again with read write permissions. So once we do that, the system has been mounted in read write format, and now we can issue password command. Password. Okay, so password is not there. So before doing that, we need to issue another command, which is change root and sysroot. Once I do that, we see that our prompt has been changed. We have been put into the root, and I can issue now the command, which is password, enter, and now it is asking for changing the root password. So just giving the password of the root, whatever you want to set. The limit is 7 characters. So once that is set, now there is any other important command that you need to put in here, and that is related with SE Linux or Security Enhanced Linux. that adds some additional security layer of as far as CentOS or Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 or even 6 are concerned. But you do not need to worry about that. Just remember that if you have installed CentOS 7 with its default options, then your SE Linux has also been installed, and not only that is installed, it is also enforcing or it is active. So once you change the root password, the SE Linux security context are not changed and they get to be in wrong state. So to correct them, let's just type the or create a file saying touch and dot. So type in touch / dot, and the name of the file you need to create is auto relabel. So it means that once you create that file, at the boot time, next boot time, the SE Linux will auto recreate the labels. If you do not do that, your system might not work correctly and you may not be able to get logged into the system. So do remember this step. It is specifically for SE Linux. Now I press enter, and once that file is created, we just simply need to get out of the system by pressing enter and then another enter, and system will get booted up. It will take a little while so that the SE Linux creates its auto relabels at the next boot time, and then surely you will be able to get logged into the system without any problems. Okay, so now that we have seen what is the boot sequence and how we can change the kernel parameters at the boot time, let's also see some of the commands and the better recommended ways to shut down our operating system. Now the first one that I want to show you is, let's say if we want to restart the system, then there are commands which is like tell init, which invokes init command itself, and if we type in 6, it would restart the system on most of the Linux distributions, but this one is not the recommended way. The other way to do that would be, let's say, to reboot. That command is okay. And if we want to, let's say, halt the system so that it just shuts down all the processes, but the power is still on to the system, it does not get cut off, we can use the command halt. Or if we want that the power should also be cut off, the system should totally be in the powered off state, we can use the command power off. There is another command which I use and which I would recommend for you to use is shutdown command. Now this shutdown command has got the benefit that it has got multiple switches like -R for rebooting, -H for halting the system, and even -P to power off the system. Not only that, rather we can also give in some message to other users if they have been logged in onto the terminals, like they have remotely accessed the machine. So we can do that by putting in remarks over here, and also we can put in time, like maybe if I put in, let's say 3, and after that I put in remarks that system going down in 3 minutes. Now if I put this command, and let me also open up another terminal so that we can see that what is going on. If I press enter, okay, so I need to be root of course, and just give in the password. Now you see, as soon as I pressed enter, we have got this message that the system is going down in 3 minutes, and if this had been another user, he would also get this message that the system is going down. Now I can break this sequence, this shutdown sequence, by simply pressing Ctrl C, and we see that shutdown sequence has been cancelled. Now there is another option which we can apply to immediately boot the system. If I want to type, let's say, sudo and then shutdown, and then let's say -R to reboot the system, immediately I can give in the switch which is now. So once we do that, the system will immediately be restarted, which it does, which we can see that the initialization sequence has started. The system is booting up. It has already gone through the stages of init rd, post, then grub check, and then MBR and bootloaders, and then now it has given us the GUI interface. I give in my password and I get logged in. Also, an interesting thing I can show you, remember I told you about in the boot sequence there was a step where init.rd gets loaded up, which I told you about, that it's the miniature root file system. So we can see the contents of that init.rd file, and that file is in boot folder. If I type in cd then boot and then ls, then we see that this is the file that I was talking about. This is this init.rd image file, and if I do ls-l to show you the size of this file, this is around 14 megabyte. So let's try to do one thing. Let's try to create a directory in, let's say, make directory, and let's make that in home Ahmed, and let's just name it maybe test directory. And also let's try to copy this file, which is init.rd, into that directory, which is test directory. Now once the file is copied, let's get into that directory, home Ahmed and test directory, and over here this is the file. Now the first step that we need to do is so once we have got the file in the directory, we need to compress this one. And let me just bring up another terminal. So I'm here at the moment, and if I go into that particular directory which was testing or test directory, okay, so test directory, and do an ls, I need to make a copy of this file which is init.rd, and I can do that by putting in an extension .gz. Now once that file is there, it looks kind of odd, but we need to uncompress it. So I type in gunzip init.rd and the name of the file, and it says that if I want to override this one, I say yes, go ahead, override this one, and I do an ls, and now I imply the cpio to extract the files from the archive, and I also give it the parameter that make directories, and take the input from this init.rd file. So I just need to copy this one and paste it over here. So once I do that and I do an ls, we see that it has created these directories, and this is the directories that I was talking about, that these are, if we have a look at the contents of this bin directory, we see that it's got very limited number of executables. We have got some executables in sbin directory, and also respective libraries, shared libraries that are required for that, subscripts and some configuration and etc. So this is the tiny root file system that I was talking about, that gets loaded after the bootloader gets or pass on the control to this tiny root operating system, which in turn then loads all the required modules of your specific hardware into the respective kernel. So that's all there is to it. As far as Linux boot sequence is concerned, what are some of the ways that we can bring the system down gracefully? And also we have seen an example where we have changed the boot parameter of Linux kernel to bring us into single user mode. I hope you have learned from these videos, and I would like to thank you for viewing.